In a printing house in Leipzig in the spring of 1912, a water pipe burst in the ceiling above the composing room. Nobody died. Nobody was even hurt. A pipe let go somewhere in the building. The water came down through the floors, and it found the stacked sheets of a book that was almost finished. The printer had been setting it for months. The final sheets were on the press. By the time anyone reached that room with buckets, the ink had lifted off the paper, the type had been pulled, and the whole edition was gone. What the water destroyed that afternoon was the first printing of a gospel that had been lost for 1,500 years. A Christian text older than most of the creeds, written under the name of a woman. It had survived the fall of Roman Egypt, the closing of the monasteries, 1,000 years buried in dry ground, and a boat trip to Berlin. It did not survive a plumbing failure in Saxony. Because of that one afternoon, nobody outside a very small circle of German scholars would read the Gospel of Mary for another 43 years. I had half of this script written from a completely different angle. I was going to tell you about a suppressed woman apostle, because that is the story everybody tells about this text, and it is the story I expected to find. Then I read the last 4 lines of the book in both languages it survives in. They do not say the same thing. Once I saw that, I threw the draft out and started again. Hold on to one thing for the next half hour. This book is broken. 10 of its pages are gone, torn out of the front and the middle, including almost the whole of the vision it exists to report. For a century, that was simply the end of it. Then, in 2023, a scrap of Greek papyrus was published out of a collection in Oxford, and some very careful scholars looked at it and said that it might be one of the missing pages. We will come back to that scrap. First, you need a reason to believe any of this. The manuscript is real, and you can go and find where it lives. In January of 1896, a German diplomat named Karl Reinhardt was in Cairo, working the antiquities trade, and he bought a small Coptic codex. It had come out of the ground at Akhmim in Upper Egypt. By the account that has traveled with it, the book had been hidden in a niche in a wall at a Christian burial site, wrapped in feathers. Reinhardt carried it to Berlin. On the 16th of July that same year, a scholar named Carl Schmidt presented it to the Royal Prussian Academy of Sciences. It was given a museum number, Papyrus Barrow-Linensis 8502, and it is still catalogued under that number today. The codex is written in Sahidic Coptic, the language of Egyptian Christians, and the handwriting places it in the 5th century, possibly the very end of the 4th. It holds 4 texts: the Apocryphon of John, the Sophia of Jesus Christ, a short version of the Act of Peter, and, standing first in the codex, a text whose title appears only at the very end of it, in a single line, the way ancient books were often signed. The Gospel according to Mary. Hold that date carefully, because the date of a manuscript is not the date of a text. The Berlin Codex is a 5th century copy. What it copies is much older, and we know that from 2 other pieces of evidence, in another language, from another site. The first is a fragment of Greek papyrus in the John Rylands Library in Manchester, catalogued as Papyrus Rylands 463. C.H. Roberts edited and published it in 1938. On the handwriting, it dates to the early 3rd century, which makes it the oldest surviving piece of this gospel anywhere in the world. It is small, 1 leaf, torn, written on both sides. It matches. The second is another Greek fragment, Papyrus Oxyrhynchus 3525, which came out of the enormous rubbish mounds at Oxyrhynchus that Bernard Grenfell and Arthur Hunt excavated between 1897 and 1906. 3rd century as well. Also a match. So there are 3 witnesses in 2 languages from at least 2 separate find sites, and the earliest of them is a Greek copy from around the year 200. A text does not get copied into Greek in Egypt in the year 200 unless it was already circulating well before that. Karen King, who published the Standard Critical Edition in 2003, argues that the Gospel of Mary was composed early in the 2nd century. Christopher Tuckett, in his Oxford edition of 2007, agrees on the century and places it slightly later within it. Anne Pasquier prefers the second half of the century. That is a real scholarly range, and I am going to leave it open, because it is open. The low end of that range deserves to be said slowly. Early 2nd century. That is within living memory of people who had known the apostles. That is roughly the same window in which some of the letters of the New Testament were still being collected. Before we are finished, I am going to read you one sentence from this book twice, from 2 different copies, and the 2 copies will not agree about who walks out the door at the end. Keep that somewhere in the back of your mind. Now let me kill something. If you have heard of the Gospel of Mary at all, you have probably heard it called one of the Nag Hammadi texts, part of a library of forbidden books the church tried to burn, and some monk buried in a jar in the desert. That is a very good story. It is also wrong. This book was bought in a Cairo antiquities shop in 1896, 49 years before the Nag Hammadi library came out of the ground. It has never been inside that jar. Nobody in Rome ordered it destroyed. No council names it. No pope condemns it. No index lists it. What actually happened to this book is stranger and far more ordinary than a cover-up, and I will show you exactly what it was. Start with the damage, because the damage shapes everything. The Coptic codex is missing 10 pages out of 19. Pages 1 through 6 gone entirely. Pages 11 through 14 gone entirely. The book opens in the middle of a sentence, and then, at the exact moment it begins describing the vision it exists to describe, it stops again for 4 pages and resumes somewhere else. Lance Jennett, whose translation I have been working from, puts it plainly. Nearly half the text is lost. Think about what disappears with those first 6 pages. The setting, who is speaking, where they are, which Mary this is, because the text never tells us. Nowhere in anything that survives is she called Mary Magdalene. She is only Mary. There were several women named Mary around Jesus in the Gospels we do have, and scholars have argued for more than one of them. Stephen Shoemaker and Stanley Jones have made a case that she is the mother of Jesus. Karen King argues, and most of the field now follows her, that she is Mary of Magdala, on the strength of how she behaves in the text and how other early writings speak about her. The identification is a reconstruction. It is a good one. It is still a reconstruction. That gap is the first thing this book teaches you. We are reading the ruins of an argument. So what survives? The text opens with disciples asking questions and a teacher answering them. He is called the Savior and the Blessed One, and once the Son of Man, and never Jesus by name in the surviving pages. Someone asks whether matter will be destroyed. He answers that every nature and every formation exists mixed together with every other, and that each will dissolve back into its own root. Peter asks him what the sin of the world is. The answer is one of the strangest lines in early Christian literature. Sin itself does not exist. There is no such thing as sin as a power loose in the world. What exists is what people do. You commit sin when you act against your own nature, when you do the things that get called sin, like adultery. Sin has no independent life of its own. It is something you do. Stay with that for a moment, because a great deal of later Christianity is built on the other answer. Then he embraces them and says, "Peace be with you, receive my peace," and warns them not to be led astray by anyone saying, "Look here," or "Look there," because the Son of Man is inside them already. "Go," he says, "preach the good news of the kingdom." Then he says the line I keep coming back to. "Do not lay down any rule beyond what I established for you, and do not give a law like that of the lawgiver, or else you will be constrained by it." Those are the last words the risen teacher speaks in this gospel. Not a commission to build, not a promise of authority, a warning against making rules. Then he leaves. What happens next is the most recognizably human page in the whole book. The disciples do not glow with confidence. They come apart. They weep. They say to each other, "How are we supposed to go out to the Gentiles and preach the kingdom when they did not spare him? How will they spare us?" That is not a theological question. They are asking whether they are about to be killed. Mary is the one who stands up. She stands up, she embraces them, and she tells them to stop weeping and stop being divided in their hearts, because His grace will be with them and will shelter them. She tells them He made them into human beings. In the Coptic text, the next sentence says that she turned their hearts toward the good, and they began to discuss the words of the teacher. That is the picture. In the oldest surviving copy of this book, the person holding the group together after the crucifixion is a woman, and the men are the ones crying on the floor. Closer. Now the second movement, where the trouble starts, although nobody in that room can see it coming. Peter turns to her. Peter is not hostile here, and this is the part people skip. He says, "Sister, we know the teacher loved you more than the rest of the women. Tell us the words of the teacher that you remember, the ones you know and we do not, the ones we have not heard." He asks her. In front of everyone, he asks her to teach. She agrees. "What is hidden from you," she says, "I will tell you." And she begins. "I saw the Lord in a vision," she says, "and I said to him, 'Lord, I saw you today in a vision.'" He answers that she is blessed, because she did not waver at the sight of him. Where the mind is, he tells her, there is the treasure. She asks how a person sees a vision at all, through the soul or through the spirit. He tells her it is through neither. It is through the mind, which stands between the two. Then the page runs out. That is the 4-page gap, right there. The whole revelation, the actual content of the Gospel of Mary, the thing the entire book exists to deliver, sat on pages 11 through 14 of a 5th century codex, and those pages are not in the box in Berlin. They were already gone before Karl Reinhardt ever saw the book. I want to be careful with you here, because this is precisely the moment a channel like this one is supposed to lean in and tell you the pages were removed on purpose. I have no evidence of that, and neither does anyone else. Codices lose their outer and middle leaves first, because that is where the binding fails. The damage pattern of this book is completely ordinary. Our luck is what is unusual. When the text resumes on page 15, we land in the middle of something extraordinary. A soul is climbing. It has left a body and it is rising, and on the way up it keeps being stopped and questioned by powers, one after another, like checkpoints. The first two are lost inside the gap. The one we come down into is desire, and desire says to the soul, "I did not see you when you were coming down, but now I see you going up. How can you lie when you belong to me?" The soul answers, "I saw you, and you did not see me. You did not recognize me. I was clothed, and you did not know what I was." Then the third power, ignorance, interrogates it. "Where are you going? You were bound by wickedness. Do not judge." The soul answers, "Why do you judge me when I have not judged? I was bound, and I did not bind. They did not recognize me, but I recognized them." Then a fourth power, and this one wears 7 forms, and the text lists all of them. Darkness, desire, ignorance, the eagerness for death, the kingdom of the flesh, the foolish thinking of the flesh, the wrath of an enraged person. Together they are called the 7 powers of wrath, and they scream at the soul, "Where are you coming from, murderer? Where are you going, deserter?" The soul does not argue with the accusation. It sings, "What constrains me has been vanquished. What surrounds me has been defeated. My desire has ended. Ignorance has died. Through a world I was set free from a world. From now on, I will have rest in silence. That is the vision. That is what Mary saw, and that is what she tells the men in the room. One candle, one woman speaking, 11 people listening. And we are not close to the hardest part of this yet, because in a few minutes I am going to show you a single letter of Greek grammar that changes who this story is about. Watch what happens next. Mary stops talking because the teacher had spoken with her up to that point and no further. There is a silence. Andrew breaks it. Andrew says to the brothers, "Say what you will about what she said. I, for one, do not believe the teacher said these things. They are quite different ideas." That is a doctrinal objection, and it is a fair one. Andrew is saying, this does not sound like him. This does not match what we were taught. In the 2nd century, that was exactly the right question to ask about any claimed private revelation, and honest people asked it constantly. If the argument had stopped there, the Gospel of Mary would be a footnote. Then Peter speaks. Peter does not say that the teaching is wrong. He didn't really speak with the woman in secret, did he? Apart from us and not out in the open. Are we all going to turn around and listen to her? Did he choose her over us? Read those 4 questions again and notice what is missing from them. There is no argument anywhere inside them. Nothing about the soul, nothing about the powers, nothing about the mind standing between soul and spirit. The subject has been changed. The question is no longer whether the revelation is true. The question is whether the person carrying it is allowed to carry it. This is the same Peter who 3 pages earlier said, "Sister, we know he loved you more than the rest of the women. Tell us what you know." He asked her to speak. She spoke. He could not bear what it implied. 1 step left before that sentence. Here is where the book did something I was not prepared for, and I have worked through a lot of these texts by now. It does not resolve this in her favor by having her win the argument. It has her cry. "Then Mary wept," the text says, "and she said, 'Peter, my brother Peter, what are you thinking? Do you imagine that I thought this up by myself, in my own heart? Do you think I am lying about the teacher?' That is her entire defense. She produces no proof. She asks him what he thinks she is. Levi answers Peter, and Levi's speech is the emotional peak of the book. "Peter," he says, "you have always been a hothead. Now I see you going after the woman as if you were her adversary. If the teacher made her worthy, who then are you to reject her?" He knew her completely. That is why he loved her more than us. Levi tells them all to be ashamed of themselves, to clothe themselves with the perfect human being, to do what they were commanded, and to go and preach the good news, laying down no other rule or law beyond what the teacher himself said, which is exactly what the teacher said on page 9 before he left. The book closes its own circle. The men trying to police who may speak are the men breaking the one instruction they were actually given. Then comes the last sentence. In the Coptic codex in Berlin, the 5th century copy, it reads, "After Levi said this, they started going out to teach and to preach." They, all of them. The argument is over. The community is reconciled. Everybody walks out the door together. Now here is the Greek. Papyrus Rylands 463, the older copy, 200 years closer to whatever the original said. After Levi said this, he went out and began to preach the good news. He, Levi, alone. In the oldest surviving copy of this gospel, the argument does not end in reconciliation. One man is persuaded and he leaves, and the others stay behind. Somewhere between the Greek of the 3rd century and the Coptic of the 5th, a verb ending changed, and the story acquired a happy ending it did not have. There is a second difference in the same passage, smaller and worse. In the Coptic, Levi says the teacher loved her more than us. In the Greek, Levi says only that he loved her. The comparison is absent. Either a Coptic scribe added it or a Greek scribe removed it, and we cannot tell which. The two oldest witnesses to this book disagree inside the same paragraph about how much Jesus loved Mary of Magdala and about whether anybody believed her. In neither version does Mary go out to preach at all. Read both endings again. In the Greek, Levi goes. In the Coptic, they go. She is never named among the people who walk out that door. The book everyone quotes as early Christianity's great argument for a woman's authority does not, in either of its two oldest forms, let her use it. So why did this book vanish? The honest answer has no villain in it. There was no ban. Go through the ancient lists of accepted books, and the Gospel of Mary is not on them, which is expected. Now go through the lists of rejected books, the catalogues of heresies, the works where Irenaeus and Tertullian and Epiphanius march through forbidden writings by name and attack them one at a time. It is not there either, not condemned, not refuted, not mentioned. As far as the surviving record goes, the loudest heresy hunters of the early church never wrote its name down once. That is not what suppression looks like. Suppression leaves fingerprints, and the early church was extremely talkative about the books it hated. What happened is that people stopped copying it, and copying was the only life support a book had. Every ancient text that survives because somebody with ink and time decided it was worth another 20 hours of their life. When that stops, the book dies. Not by decree, by silence. There were reasons the copying stopped, several of them, none of them a conspiracy. The first is the shape of the revelation itself. The Gospel of Mary is built on a private teaching given to one person after the resurrection that nobody else witnessed. As the 2nd century wore on, the churches that would become the mainstream grew very nervous about that entire category, because anyone could claim it and nobody could check it. Andrew's objection in the text is the objection the whole institution eventually adopted. The second is the content. Sin has no independent existence. Matter dissolves back into its own root. The soul climbs past cosmic gatekeepers by refusing their accusation. Some of that is ordinary Greek philosophy, and some of it sits very close to the systems that got labeled Gnostic and pushed out. A book does not need to be condemned to be quietly dropped for keeping the wrong company. The third is the fight the book is actually about. In the same decades this gospel was circulating, the question of whether women could teach was being settled, and it was being settled the other way. The letter of 1 Timothy in the New Testament states flatly that a woman is not permitted to teach or hold authority over a man. Tertullian, writing in North Africa around the year 200, the same generation as the Rylands fragment, is blunter still about women teaching and baptizing. The Gospel of Mary lost that argument. It lost it the way arguments actually get lost, by standing on the wrong side of what everyone around it had already decided was obvious. There is one detail in this story I cannot get out of my head. Papyrus Oxyrhynchus 3525 came out of the ground in Egypt sometime between 1897 and 1906. Grenfell and Hunt shipped tens of thousands of scraps back to Oxford in tin boxes. That fragment sat in a box in England for something like 80 years. Peter Parsons finally published it in 1983. For most of the 20th century, a 3rd century Greek copy of the Gospel of Mary was physically sitting in a university collection in England, while scholars across Europe wrote about how thin the evidence for this text was. Nobody hid it. Nobody had to. It was in the room the whole time. Which brings me back to the scrap I promised you. In 2023, in volume 87 of the Oxyrhynchus Papyri, Juan Chapa published a small piece of papyrus catalogued as P.Oxy 5577. a leaf about 13 centimeters by 9. On it, in Greek, a fragmentary dialogue in which a woman named Maria is being taught by Jesus. The vocabulary on that scrap circles the same ideas the Gospel of Mary circles. The good, the mind, elements that are intertwined and then dissolved. Elizabeth Schrader-Polzer, Silke Peterson, and Sarah Parkhouse have each argued that it could belong to the Gospel of Mary, and if it does, the obvious place for it is the 4-page hole in the middle, the missing vision. Mark Goodacre has urged caution, pointing out wording on the fragment that does not appear anywhere in the text we have. I am not going to tell you that argument is finished, because it is not. 127 years after Karl Reinhardt walked out of that Cairo shop, we are still finding out how large this book was. Now, go back to the water. Carl Schmidt had the Berlin Codex ready for the press in 1912. The pipe burst, the sheets were destroyed, and then the First World War arrived, and then the years after it, and Schmidt died in 1938 without ever seeing it in print. The work passed to Walter Till. Till worked through the Second War. Then in 1945, in the Egyptian desert, the Nag Hammadi library came out of the ground carrying fresh copies of the Apocryphon of John, and Till, being a careful man, stopped and waited so that he could take the new evidence into account. The first complete edition appeared in 1955, 59 years after that codex left Cairo. 43 of them lost to a flooded room, 2 wars, and 1 scholar's death. So here is what this leaves me with. I came to this text expecting a suppression story, and there is no suppression story. Water did it once, by accident, in Leipzig. Neglect did it the first time, slowly, across about 300 years, in the copying rooms of Egypt. Between those 2 accidents, the only things that kept the Gospel of Mary in the world at all were a niche in a wall at Akhmim, a diplomat with cash in his pocket, and a rubbish heap at Oxyrhynchus. I would rather hand you that than something more exciting that I cannot support. If I ever start trading the second for the first, stop watching. There is one thing in this text I cannot put down, and it is not the vision, and it is not the powers, and it is not the argument about who may speak. It is 3 words in the Coptic that no council ever needed to remove. Then Mary wept. Almost every other early Christian text about this woman has an agenda for her. Later Christians turned her into a penitent prostitute, and they did it on a specific date. In the year 591, Pope Gregory the Great preached a homily in Rome in which he took 3 separate women out of the Gospels: the unnamed sinner in Luke who anoints Jesus' feet, Mary of Bethany, and Mary Magdalene, and declared that all 3 were one person. That single sermon fixed her identity in Western art and imagination for the next 1,378 years, until the Roman calendar reform of 1969 quietly pulled them apart again. In 2016, Pope Francis raised her July feast to the same rank as the feasts of the apostles, and the decree that did it gave her back a title some of the earliest Christian writers had already used for her: Apostle to the Apostles. 14 centuries to return a title. In this broken book from Akhmim, before any of that happened, nobody has made her into anything yet. She is a woman in a room full of frightened men, who has just told them the truth as she received it, and who is crying because the person she trusted most has asked out loud whether she made it up. That is what the water almost took. The argument in that room was never settled. It was buried, dug up, drowned, and dug up again, and it is still sitting there on page 18 of a damaged codex in Berlin, unfinished, waiting for whoever reads it next. Which brings me to the other book that should have been in this story and was not. When I told you the Gospel of Mary is not from Nag Hammadi, I walked straight past what Nag Hammadi actually was. In December of 1945, an Egyptian farmer digging for fertilizer at the base of a cliff broke open a sealed jar. Inside were 13 leather-bound books holding more than 50 texts that had been out of human hands since the 4th century. Some of the pages were burned as kindling in a farmhouse stove. One codex was very nearly traded away for cigarettes. That is the next story. How the largest recovery of lost Christian writing in history was found by accident, half destroyed by the people who found it, and came within days of